Hey guys, Forgotten Fox here, and today I am bringing you a highly requested video regarding which carrier line is right for you. Now, with the exception of the Graf Zeppelin, there are two nationalities for carriers in the game at this current point in time. The first are the carriers of the United States Navy, and the second are the carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy. I am going to be talking primarily about the tier 10s for each of these lines, as this should be the ultimate goal of grinding down them. But the general principle for this evaluation is present in every other carrier at subsequent tiers. So firstly, I will be going over the tier 10 USN carrier, Midway. The Midway, like all carriers, is instrumental to the success of your team when played in coordination with your other surface ships. The Midway specifically boasts powerful anti-aircraft suites, combined with capable dive bomber squadrons, and followed up by a secondary run with torpedo bombers. As far as fighters, the Midway has access to one fighter squadron of 5 planes, giving it quite a powerful punch due to the higher hit point nature of not only the fighters, but all of its aircraft. The higher hit point pool of the Midway's planes allows them to survive most drops on enemy ships with minimal losses. The Midway also has identical plane service times to the Japanese carrier. The Midway herself is more detectable than the Japanese carrier counterparts, but she's also more heavily fitted with armor, and therefore more sturdy under relentless enemy fire. The Midway also gets access to a piece of equipment that Japanese carriers do not. The Attack Aircraft Modification 1 gives 10% more hit points to both dive bombers and torpedo bombers' health, easily giving the Midway the healthiest planes at tier 10 and in the game. The counterpart to the Midway is the tier 10 Japanese carrier Hakuryu. This ship, despite appearing inferior to the Midway in many respects, actually boasts unique gameplay attributes that allow her to take the top spot as the best tier 10 carrier in my opinion, and I will explain why. While the Hakuryu definitely has less small and large caliber AA damage than the Midway, the sheer number of small caliber AA mounts outnumber the Midway's and allow her to shoot down the same number of planes attacking her as a Midway can, despite having less alpha damage on the AA guns. The Hakuryu boasts impressive torpedo bomber squadrons, with almost identical damage numbers to the Midway's dive bombers. The Hakuryu torpedo bombers are supplemented by dive bomber squadrons that are not as powerful as the Midway's secondary torpedo squad in alpha damage, but they make up for it by having higher damage over time capacity than the Midway's torpedo bombers. Even if everything I've just said is true, how can the Japanese carrier compete with the American sheer advantage in hit points, while also the fact that the American carrier has the same service time per plane? This is where the true hidden advantage of the Hakuryu is hiding, a statistic that is not listed in the ship details. While the aircraft service times listed in the stats page are identical for each type of aircraft, the numbers don't account for squadron size. If 3 planes in a Japanese dive bomber squadron take 4.8 seconds to service apiece, and the American carrier shares the same service time for their dive bombers, the way service time is calculated for them is by multiplying the service time by the number of planes in the squadron. This means that an American dive bomber squadron takes 5 planes times 4.8 seconds each for a total of 24 seconds to service a dive bomber squadron. The Japanese dive bomber squadron of only 3 planes takes a considerably smaller 14 seconds, rounded down, to service. This is where the advantage starts to become more obvious. If the Japanese carrier has 2 squadrons of 3, both squadrons will service independently of each other, allowing the 6 total dive bombers to complete servicing in 14 seconds. The Americans, however, for their supplemental squadrons of torpedo bombers, takes the full 24 seconds due to it having a large single squadron size, therefore a longer service time. This is even more present in the offensive squadron size, where the 4 Japanese planes will service considerably faster than the 5 American dive bombers, despite the fact that they have identical service times per plane. But why should you even care about service time? Service time is only a minor inconvenience, right? As it turns out, the servicing time for carriers can almost be seen as a damage per minute number. This means that the Japanese carrier can output considerably more damage in a round than an American carrier because they can get their squadrons back in the air anywhere from 15% faster for the main attack squadron all the way up to 40% faster for the secondary squadrons. And the advantage is not only for attacking squadrons. Even Japanese fighters can benefit from this. In a dogfight, the 5 American fighters will chew through 6 Japanese fighters with relative ease, but they will still incur losses, and typically only 1 to 3 planes will survive in the American squadron, depending on the equipment and captain perks that the American carrier is running. But what then? The Japanese fighters can replenish both their squadrons in 19 seconds. The American carrier has 2 choices. He can either recall his squadron, wait 30 seconds, and then send it back out, which, accounting for travel time, means that his planes will effectively be out of the game for about a minute, giving the Japanese fighters a full 35 seconds after travel time to wreak havoc on the American squadrons. But what if the American carrier keeps his fighters in the air? In 20 seconds, the Japanese fighters will be back in the air, and 6 planes fighting their remnants of the damaged squadron will result in the total loss for the American squadron, and a 60-second service time before factoring in travel time, which would allow the Japanese planes to devastate the American offensive aircraft. But what about replacement planes? If the Japanese carrier keeps throwing away their planes to the Americans, won't they run out faster than the American carrier? Well, that answer is just simply not the case. If both carriers are equipped with their optimal equipment, which I will detail shortly, the American carrier has the same number of dive bomber replacements as the Japanese torpedo bomber replacements. The Japanese carrier also has the same number of dive bomber replacements as the American carrier has torpedo bomber replacements. The only difference is in fighters, where the American carrier has 4 more fighters than the Japanese. But when both of them hold over 20 planes, these 4 planes have a relatively small impact in the game. Speaking of that equipment, what equipment should you run for these carriers? For most public matches, I recommend the Air Hangar Modification 2 for your Japanese carriers, as their torpedo bombers are their main strike force, and this gives them identical primary attack aircraft in storage to the Americans. For the American carrier, a strong argument could be made for the fighter modification, or for the extra hit points in their attacking squadrons. But with the glaring service time weakness for the Midway, I personally prefer the service time modification to minimize the amount of downtime my planes have, and to avoid allowing the Japanese an even larger advantage. But why haven't many players realized which carrier is superior? This comes down to a phenomenon I call the skill house. The American carrier, by nature of its attacking squadrons, has a high skill floor and a low skill ceiling. This is mainly because the main offense for an American carrier, the dive bombers, are a roll of the dice to determine the damage and fires you get. It's essentially a fire and forget weapon that will drop all by itself once a target is selected. This means that a captain can focus all of his or her attention on aiming the torpedo bombers. This playstyle that requires only directing the torpedo bombers and fighters, as well as auto-locking the bombers, means that the carrier has a high skill floor. The high floor means that even new players will find the Midway relatively comforting, even if they're unable to correctly aim the torpedo bombers or direct the fighters. On the other hand, the Midway has a low skill ceiling. With a low skill ceiling, Better players, who know how to aim and direct planes, will feel somewhat limited by the Midway's reliance on RNG when dropping its attacking dive bombers, and its relatively small number of squadrons, which limit your spotting capability. The Hakuryu, on the Japanese side, has the exact opposite skill house. The Hakuryu has a low skill floor, meaning new players who do not fully understand the aiming mechanics for torpedo bombers will be supported only by the fire and forget dive bombers, resulting in low performance games. However, skilled players, who can take full advantage of the Hakuryu's torpedo bomber strikes and her servicing time advantage, will be able to achieve better games than equally skilled Midway captains. Despite all this, playing the Japanese carrier does not guarantee victory. If you purposely attack clusters of ships, you will run out of aircraft, just as if you purposely attack clusters of ships with the Midway. The Hakuryu is perfectly capable of doing zero-loss drops, provided the captains are skilled enough to maximize the damage they put on target and minimize the time over enemy ships' anti-aircraft batteries. The best way to accomplish this is to focus out lone targets that are isolated from the pack in either carrier, as it reduces the losses and allows for more fine-tuning your drops for maximum impact. The best way to accomplish this is to focus out lone targets that are isolated from the pack in either carrier, as it reduces losses and allows for more fine-tuning your drops for maximum impact. I will go over the finer points of playing aircraft carriers in my next video, but for now I wanted to answer the question of which aircraft carrier nation is the best for you in my own words, so that you as players can choose which nation appeals to your skill set the most. If you are new to carriers, or you prefer less active gameplay, focusing more on watching the battle unfold or directing your team, the Midway is likely for you, as its simplistic dive bomber mechanic allows for little errors while dropping torpedoes, not to impact your overall performance as much as the Hakuryu. But if you are an advanced player who is looking to do the maximum amount of damage and spot for your team with the Hakuryu's greater number of squadrons, then you'll have a better idea for why the Japanese carrier should appeal to you. Thank you all for watching. Good luck and fair seas.